So thank you all so much for joining us. Author Helena Echlin will discuss her new thriller, Clever Little Thing, in conversation with author Tracy Sierra in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. Helena has written for numerous publications on both sides of the Atlantic, including The Guardian and The Times. She taught at Stanford University for 8 years and has recently returned to the UK, where she now teaches fiction writing for Oxford University's Department of Continuing Education. She lives in Oxfordshire with her husband and 2 children. And Tracy was born and raised in the Colorado mountains. She is an attorney who currently lives in New England in an antique colonial era home, complete with its own secret room. When not writing, she spends time with her husband and 2 children. Night Watching was her debut novel and was selected as a Fallon Book Club pick. So with all that said, folks, let's give Helena and Tracy a big virtual round of applause for joining us here today. And Helena, I'm going to turn it over to you to briefly discuss your book and do a reading.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Robert, for inviting me and Tracy to be here. I really appreciate it. And it's midnight in the UK, so I seem a little overly caffeinated. It's because I had 11 cups of tea before this. So I'm going to just talk quickly about what my novel is about to give you the background, and then I'm going to read for 5 minutes. Clever Little Thing is about a mum, Charlotte, who adores her brilliant 8-year-old Stella. But Stella can be difficult. She hates baths, she hates other kids. She won't eat any food that's touching each other, and she's definitely a bit challenging. Then when Stella's babysitter, Blanka, dies, Stella undergoes a mysterious change, and all of a sudden she's become this docile, biddable, agreeable child who eats everything on her plate and goes on play dates. And everyone else thinks this is really wonderful, including Charlotte's husband, Pete. But Charlotte alone knows that something's very wrong. And so her journey in the novel is to figure out what's wrong with Stella. She believes that Blanka is somehow controlling Stella, or may even have possessed her from beyond the grave. So I'm going to read a short chapter. It's chapter 3. So the novel opens with Charlotte in a sort of psychiatric unit for mothers with mental health problems that's called the Cottage. And it's a super fancy place with a sort of wellness center vibe. And they make all the mums change into these sort of fancy white sweatpants and long sleeved white shirts. So you'll see Charlotte wearing that in this chapter. Charlotte's about to meet her therapist, and Charlotte's task in this chapter is to persuade the therapist that she's sane so that she can go home and exorcise her possessed daughter. I compose my face, trying to appear calm, but not too calm. I must appear exactly as calm as a sane person would in this situation. I am sane, I remind myself. Still, it's hard to look sane when I'm forced to wear what amounts to pajamas. I sit up straight on the edge of the sofa, feet planted on the floor. Dr. Beaufort, my new therapist, has a round, earnest face, greying brown hair cut sensibly short, and a navy poncho that looks like it has dog hair on it. Sorry about this old thing, she says. I feel the cold. Don't you? Snuggle up in the blanket, why don't you? I'm fine. A blanket isn't going to help me right now. On the wall is a painting of a woman standing in a river, facing away from the viewer. She looks like she's trying to hold her ground, but any minute a mighty current will sweep her away. Do you need the tissues? Dr. Beaufort asks. I moved them onto that side table there. I used to have them on the coffee table, but then a patient said they made her feel like I wanted her to cry. I don't want you to cry. That is, not unless you want to. Okay, I say. She's babbling. Maybe she's new to this job. Perhaps she got her qualification after her kids started school. To the right of her is a bookcase which has heavy psychiatric diagnostic manuals, but also Mind Over Mother and Good Mums Have Scary Thoughts. Is she a mother who has had scary thoughts? On a side table at her elbow sits a misshapen vase of dried spear thistles. There are no family photos, but that ugly vase definitely looks like it was made by a child. Charlotte, Dr. Beaufort has asked a question. Sorry? Can you tell me why you're here? I stroke my throat. When I was 7, my mother took me to see a doctor about a persistent cough. 3 doctors later, we learned it was thyroid cancer. Even though they cured me, I disliked doctors ever since. Why are you here? Dr. Beaufort repeats gently. I stare at the bowl of marble eggs on her coffee table. My husband thinks I need a rest. Dr. Beaufort nods. What mother doesn't, right? I chuckle obligingly. She studies me with her serious gaze. The intake form says you're concerned about your daughter Stella? A headache blooms on the right side of my forehead. Peter's filled her in already. She will likely report on our sessions to him. I probably gave permission on the form I signed when I was so distraught. I have to convince my husband of my sanity, so he will take me seriously and help me save Stella. But if Dr. Beaufort is reporting to him, I need to get her on my side too. I pick up a marble egg and weigh its coolness in my good hand. I want to roll it over my brow to soothe its ache. But I must remain calm, polite, composed, while also making her believe me. I need to choose my words carefully, share the monstrous truth a little at a time. Yes, I am worried about Stella, I say. Dr. Beaufort nods. It can be very hard when a new baby comes. Charlotte just had a second child. Stella's not herself, I say. Literally, I think. And what about you? She asks. You just gave birth, and 10 weeks early at that. Hormones can have a powerful effect on the brain, especially when coupled with stress. Have you noticed any change in yourself? She looks at me, kindly, gently, seeming to take in every detail. I haven't eaten properly for months. Blood oozes from between my legs, my stitches throb. Dr. Beaufort looks at me as if she knows that becoming a mother sends your pain tolerance sky high, and that isn't always a good thing. She wears no makeup, her complexion is reddened. She looks like she washes her face with soap and water and rushes out of the house, too busy for a glance in the mirror. On her finger is a Peppa Pig plaster. She is a mother. Maybe she will help me. You're right, I tell her. I have been stressed, and the pregnancy and birth were difficult. Horrendous, in fact. But I'm still the same person. Stella isn't. The cancer that killed Pete's dad began small, with an ache in his lower back. My childhood cancer started small, with a cough that wouldn't go away. Stella's transformation also began quietly. The first signs were subtle, so subtle, but something was taking up residence inside her, biding its time. I'm listening, says Dr. Beaufort, and I begin to talk.
Thank you, Helena. That was great. You need to give me reading aloud lessons. That's excellent. I'm so excited to join you tonight and just jumping right in after the passage that you read. Obviously, from the get-go, there's this very unsettling sense because your main character, Charlotte, is in this institution. And I was wondering what kind of drew you to creating a main character who you know from the very first lines of the book could be completely unreliable.
I think because of my experience of motherhood, I felt that almost from the moment I got pregnant, I became an unreliable narrator. And I feel that we treat mothers as unreliable narrators. What do I mean by that? Let me go back to when I think the idea for this book was first sparked, when my son, who was 3 then, was playing in a wading pool with another toddler, and I was sitting with his mum, and they were playing with like tubby toys, and the other mum said, "Do you want a tip? she sort of looked at the tubby toys and she wrinkled her nose and she said, "Do you want a tip for how to clean those?" And I was like, "Well, they clean themselves because they have a bath every day." And she said, "No, well, they can get mold inside. So what you need to do is put a drop of bleach inside each toy." And I was like, I've met a mum who's crazier than I am. So I judged her, but she was judging me because she thought I was a slob with my bath toys. And that experience of her judging me and me judging her, and me later at home thinking, "Are my bath toys really disgusting?" That seemed like a really quintessential part of the experience of being a mother. And then my son's neurodivergent, and when during the pandemic, he had some major challenges, and that was a real time of crisis. And it felt like everyone was telling me, the mum, what to do. I mean, nobody was telling my husband what to do. They were telling me what to do, and including family members. And some of them were like, "Well, maybe you're the problem," meaning well. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe the reason your child's brain works differently is because you and your high levels of stress and anxiety. And that sort of spiral really interested me because I feel like it's quite a common experience for mothers to question themselves in that way. So I wanted Charlotte to be an unreliable narrator because I wanted the reader to be drawn into that and to have a similar kind of experience and think, as Charlotte does of herself, should I judge Charlotte? Is she right? Is she wrong? Because that's the way Charlotte always feels about herself.
Yeah,
Feels
that's so interesting. That is a really universal experience, I think, for mothers certainly, for women generally also, I think. And yeah, I mean, it seems like there's such a conversation in thriller, in even horror, in the literary space right now, where you have, but really specifically in genre, where you have women kind of using genre in these ways to kind of explore these experiences of being just basically your own experience in the world, but exploring it via genre. Like, did you think about that when you were deciding to go in sort of a thriller direction? Because obviously, Clever Little Thing is a page turner. It also leans kind of literary. You have these sort of, I don't, like hints of horror with the idea of possession and being possessed. Did you kind of have that in mind about genre and being able to explore it that way?
Well, number one, I love novels of suspense. And especially during the pandemic, I feel like my boredom threshold plummeted. And I craved novels of suspense because they would take me away from all of my problems. And so I craved that experience of being absolutely gripped. So I wanted to write a book like that, which of course your book does brilliantly. And number two, I think motherhood lends itself to the thriller and horror genres because it is like, I think there is nothing, when you become a mother, that's when you experience really profound fear because you have the fear of losing your child. And I think that's what it is. There's something about motherhood and fear that go hand in hand. And then additionally, that going back to the unreliable narrator idea, I think motherhood lends itself to genre because it's a sort of slippery experience and you don't know what's real and what's not and what's right and what's not. And you're constantly questioning. That constant questioning is a very sort of thriller, very suitable for thrillers and horror too, actually.
Yeah, and I think even in the passage you read when she says, "My husband thinks I need a rest," the thing my mind went to instantly was the yellow wallpaper and that famous short story where the mother is just sort of imprisoned in this room, clawing at the walls, right? And then that combined with the psychiatrist saying, well, hormones can have a big effect because it's both true and false, right? It is true. They absolutely do. have this enormous effect. I think you explore that so well here.
It's funny, the yellow wallpaper was written, well, I don't know when it was written, but sometime in the 20th century. And can't have been later, maybe in the 40s. And so I remember when I read that long before I became a mother, and I was like, this is a kind of crazy experience that a woman today would never have. And then I had children. And before I had children, I also knew that mothers have been blamed for all sorts of things, like mothers have been blamed for schizophrenia. Recently, I found that mothers have been blamed for obsessive compulsive disorder because it used to be thought that it could have been a problem with toilet training. And like, so the yellow wallpaper, I felt like my experience when my child was experiencing all these crises was very yellow wallpaperish. And I was like, how is this happening today? Like women in the past were blamed for schizophrenia, for obsessive compulsive disorder. And now today in 2020, I'm being blamed because of my child's neurodivergence. So I think things haven't changed as much as we would like.
Yeah, it's almost like the focus changes, but the conclusion of who to blame first is evergreen.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I thought you really explored neurodivergence and specifically childhood neurodivergence here with just kind of such a human and sympathetic, empathetic voice. So I just was really curious how, you mentioned your son and your feelings of blame around that, just how you were able to create this character of Stella and just kind of illuminate these different facets of her personality.
I think it's probably true. I was thinking about your book before this, and I was like, I'm sure that some of the things that Tracy put in her novel are taken from her real family life, even though, of course, they're made up. And to make Stella, of course, I took little bits and pieces from my family's life, um, and little bits and pieces of each of my children, but then I made something entirely new. I think I feel like female neurodivergent characters, we're only just starting to represent them now. So we had Rain Man and Young Sheldon, and then recently we've had Molly the Maid from Nita Prose's books. And I thought of another one recently, but I can't remember it. So I really wanted to have a female neurodivergent character and talk about the pressure on girls to mask.
Right.
And I wanted to talk about the complexity of having a neurodivergent child, how it affects the parents, and I'm also interested in this idea that when you have a neurodivergent child, everyone's like, get them assessed, get them assessed, get them assessed. Like that's going to solve all of your problems. Whereas in fact, it's just one step in quite a complicated process. And when a child is in great difficulty, their neurodivergence may only be one piece of the puzzle. So with Stella, she is neurodivergent. That is making her life challenging. But another problem is her school, which doesn't understand her. And another problem is whatever's going on with her parents and is her mother crazy, etc.
Right. And you talk in the book about how Charlotte, because of her own kind of childhood and past experiences, can kind of empathize with Stella, even though she doesn't necessarily share her same sort of traits or neurodivergence, because she doesn't necessarily want to label everything or um, create these sort of divides because she feels like that was created for her in her own childhood. It seems
Um,
like she's able to kind of empathize with her daughter in a way that I thought was just very much, I don't know, how a mother is able to connect with with their child in a way that others don't always understand when
Right.
they kind of have a checklist of what needs to happen.
I think some readers have been like Charlotte's not sympathetic and she is quite prickly and difficult to like. But what makes her, because she is a little bit crazy. And but her one trait that is really sympathetic is she is absolutely crazy about Stella, and she's her mother love comes with radical acceptance of Stella. She doesn't want to change Stella at all, and she's like, if we are going to help Stella, it means we have to accept her as she is. She is a girl that wants to read all the time. She wants to read really difficult adult scientific treatises. She doesn't want to have any play dates. She doesn't want any foods to touch. And the way to help Stella is just to be with her where she is. And I love that about Charlotte. I think you might not be familiar with this. Have you heard of this essay, Welcome to Holland? You probably have. Okay, so
I don't know.
well, parents of neurodivergent children have heard of this essay. It's quite old now, and I think it's a little bit controversial, but the essay Welcome to Holland, it's only like a page, says having a neurodivergent child is like thinking you were going to Italy and then on a vacation to Italy and then ending up in Holland. And as long as you think about your holiday in Italy, you're not going to enjoy Holland. But as soon as you accept the fact that you're in Holland, you're going to have a great holiday. And nowadays, I think it's a somewhat offensive. It's a little bit offensive because why can't a neurodivergent child be Italy? But if we're going to go with that metaphor, Charlotte is like, I'm in Holland. I never was going to Italy. I'm going to have a great time in Holland. And I love that about Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, I found her very sympathetic, though. I think we're all probably a little crazy and unlikable when it comes down to it, so maybe that's why. But yeah, I thought she was really sympathetic, especially because she is so patient in a way throughout a book, and throughout the book, and I think that's one of the most challenging things about being a parent is testing your patience. And I think obviously in the story itself, you deal so much with this really unsettling idea of possession and being possessed, which I think is a kind of evergreen topic in fiction because there's something just very disturbing about that. And this sense that how well can we ever really know someone, and this kind of idea. And I think it creates this really unsettling kind of, I don't know, like center to the book as you're looking into that. And I'm just wondering kind of what drew you to the idea of possession as sort of, as we heard in your reading, this sort of central obsession of the book.
I've always loved the turn of the screw. Henry James, as you know, Tracy, Henry James's novella about a governess who thinks the two kids that she's looking after are possessed by two dead servants. And what is so tremendous about that novella is that you never know whether the governess is sort of having a fantasy about the children being possessed or whether they really are possessed. So I think possession has just always been something that I've wanted to play with. And I think the idea of possession occurred to me, a motherhood possession novel. I think it came from seeing my children change and seeing them change so much. So it almost seemed like, who is this new person? If I never knew that my child could do this or be this, or who is this new person? And I think that's sort of wonderful, but also a little bit unsettling aspect of parenthood. So it came from that. This idea of my child's always changing, always growing, so I can't really know them completely.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely days where you wonder. No, that's really interesting. I think you do that so well, and I really loved the relationship. You know, one thing I really like about this book is there are these relationships between women, whether it's Charlotte and her daughter, or Charlotte kind of learning to understand, Blanka, whose death is sort of sets off the incidents of the inciting incident of the novel, or her friendship she develops with Irina, her mother, Blanka's mother. I think it's just really interesting the way that the female characters in the novel kind of give each other the benefit of the doubt a lot of the time. And I think that that is a really nice combination with sort of, like you were talking about at the beginning, our tendency to kind of judge mothers. So I just really liked that sort of, I don't know, simpatico relationship you saw between women. I don't think you necessarily see that enough in fiction, this sort of idea. But how did you kind of decide to give Charlotte kind of allies as she's exploring this extremely unlikely scenario that kind of everyone else thinks she's crazy, but there are people who kind of stand by her?
I think Charlotte wants a mother. She didn't have a good relationship with her own mother, who's now dead. So she needs to find herself a new mother. So Blanka's mother is looking for a daughter. And Charlotte's journey in the novel, I'm not going to give away the ending, but Charlotte's journey in the novel is to like figure out how to be a daughter, which means to love your mother even if she is a bit weird and crazy, which she didn't really succeed in doing with her actual mother. Female allies. So it's part of, a mother's search for a daughter and a daughter's search for a mother. But also, during the pandemic when my life was, a disaster and my child was in crisis, my female friends got me through it. And so, the power of female friendship really matters to me. And then having had a child in crisis who's now not in crisis, it completely changed the way I relate to other women and other mums, because I used to judge them and be like, well, you're crazy because your child is 17 and only eats buttered pasta. And you're crazy because your child is 7 and is still in the family bed. And you're crazy because your 6-month-old doesn't ever wear diapers ever. But once I'd had a child who was in crisis, and I knew that when other people looked at me, they'd be like, well, you're crazy because, X, Y, and Z. After that, I ceased to judge other women because I always just say to myself, I have no idea what it's like to parent that particular child. Whatever she's doing, I'm sure she's doing her best. I mean, I'm not a saint. I still judge, obviously, but I try to keep it more in my head now.
Yeah, and you've talked about how you mentioned like the pandemic and kind of it seems like you were writing during lockdowns and all of that. Is that right? Or no?
I know. Who are these
You
people who got writing done? Who are the
that was
parents?
me. That's why my book is set in my house because I was writing during lockdowns. But I guess you were dealing with your like basically very intense parenting challenges during the time. And that's kind of where the inspiration was born out of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The pandemic happened. Life was crazy. My child was in crisis. We moved from California to England during the pandemic. Everything settled down, but I had this kind of idea in my head simmering away. And then finally, the kids were back in school. And we were sort of starting over in England. We left our jobs behind. And my husband was like, look, I've made a budget. This is how much you need to earn. This is how much I need to earn. And I was like, well, I have to write a novel about a mum who thinks her child is possessed by the dead babysitter. So I'm just going to I'm just going to be spending a few months doing that. You can get on with the budget, but I have to write this novel. And to his credit, he was like, I support you in that.
I love that.
You have a pandemic with your young children? Did your husband do how did the heck did you do that?
Yeah, no, it was I think it was in part because that was one of the only times he was kind of home full time. So it was kind of my opportunity to take time for myself, strangely. So it was, yeah, it was kind of nice, but it wasn't easy. I always joke. So I was about to ask you about kind of your writing process and kind of how you fit it in, since mine was taking advantage where I can. Um, how do you kind of come up with ideas? Do you plot things out, or do you just kind of see where things go?
I wanted to ask you that, Tracy. I want to know how you plotted your novel. So let me answer first, and then is that all right? And then um, I use the how do I come up with ideas? I think it's things that I can't get out of my head, and often it's things that I'm angry about. Like I think I felt pretty angry after my experience of like, mental spiraling during my child's crisis, and so um, I wrote from that anger. But then I also think, everyone says when you write a horror novel or a thriller, you're like it's your way of dealing with your fears. But horror novels and thrillers can also be a fantasy and I think your novel is like this too. It's a way of looking at your worst fear, but that something might be wrong with your child and no one will believe you and you won't know what it is. Or that in your case, there might be a home invasion and you're at home by yourself with your young children. But they're also fantasies because they're fantasies in which the mothers, I think it's okay to say that they triumph in the end. I don't say how but their fantasies about sort of maternal power. Their fantasies about being the mom who can lift the car off the baby. So I think in this case that idea came from sort of all of that sort of psychological stuff. In terms of planning, I get a yellow legal pad and I write Act One, Act Two, Act Three, and then I write the kind of key points, inciting incident, rock bottom in Act Two. I actually got I got this to show you.
Oh,
That's
very
what
nice.
my current novel looks like. So then I just scribble on it a lot and yeah, and then I wanted to mention, I think it's really important to surprise yourself. So the part in Act Three where everything's explained, I don't know the answer to that, and I just trust that I'm going to figure it out when I get there. Because if I know the answer to it, I think the reader will know the answer to it. I'll give it away in the writing, so I just like write and write and write, and I'm like, I better figure it out when I get there. Like I didn't know why Stella is possessed until I wrote that bit. And now tell me about your process.
Yeah, I mean, I think I for inspiration tend to focus on things I fear and that I think are kind of universal fears, I guess you could say. And then I'm same as you. I scribble in a lot of notebooks. I think there's just something about like the handwriting stuff out that
Yeah.
brings things. It kind of slows down your thinking and lets you kind of bring things out. And then I do a very simple outline. So I know I have a beginning, middle, and end. And then I kind of just start. I may also then, like, the thing I do most probably is write about character. So I'll have like pages and pages about, and I may never use it, but at least I kind of know about this and that character and kind of who they are, the way they think. Um, even the bad guys, what their past is and why they do the things they do, so that hopefully I can kind of speak for them well. And then, yeah, otherwise I just am very linear once I start writing. I just start at chapter one and work my way through. Quite boring. And I've learned quite slow compared to a lot of people because I go back and revise and revise and revise, but
I
I kind of
mean,
have to know where I've been to keep moving forward.
do you when you plot, are you thinking Act One, Act Two, Act Three, inciting incident? Uh, you know, are you thinking about Save the Cat, for example? That's a famous book on plotting, for anyone who doesn't know. Are you thinking in terms of those key beats that you have to hit, or are you just like
I
this is
find those things make me very insecure. Eating all of them. I get very insecure. I have to, I mean, honestly, I had, done another novel that was a very much a learning experience, sort of drafting, and couldn't get agented on it. And the reason I couldn't it makes sense to me now, but didn't then, it was the same sort of rejection, which was the beginning is too slow. And so when I started, night watching, I was just fueled by pure spite. And I was like, I'll give you a beginning that isn't too slow. There was someone in the house. And I think that for me, like I think the beats in a way kind of end up falling naturally, especially during the editing process. Because I think as you read, if you read enough, if you're a reader, when you read, you will say like, oh, we're not getting here fast enough. This isn't quite right. And it's funny because when I look back, I can kind of make them fit that a given structure. But when I'm doing it, if I focus too much on structure, I can't do the creative piece as well. I don't think I'll ever know what break into two and save the cat means. It's just a block right
No,
here. I can't
I don't
understand it.
games either. Those
I
these
don't.
are Save the Cat has like a 15-point breakdown that's like a universal story archetype that a lot of people swear by, but Break into Two is one of them, and another one is Fun and Games.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the hero's journey just because, in a way, it's the simplest of them, even though it has very clear, um, kind of crazy things like, oh, the mentor shows up. Oh, next time the mentor is out, it still is this sort of story that gives you a basic beginning, middle, end, with excitement all the way through. And I'm sure having read Clever Little Thing, you need like a plot. I love a plot driven story, period. And I think that even the classics that I really love are often really, really plot driven or else really character driven. So I think, here you kind of explore both with this very fast-paced plot, but you've got, these themes of possession and motherhood and female expectations and narcissism, which we haven't even gotten into yet. But actually, I did want to ask you about that. Like, there are these sort of, I think you kind of paint narcissism really well and sort of the need narcissists have to see themselves as the good guy, despite kind of by definition being the bad guy. I was wondering how you like got into that and explored that.
I'm just trying to think. I feel like I've known a few people like that, and I think people who are doing bad things usually think they're doing good things. And that's really interesting that they think that they're in the right and they can sort of reorganize realities and actually start believing their own story about what's happening. And the narcissist in the book, um, he basically he concocts a story to justify his terrible behavior and then believes it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was just really interesting. I think there's so much kind of chatter about narcissism in our society today and how to kind of
The real buzzword.
diagnose it. Yeah, it's a real buzzword, but at the same time, I think we've all run into people who, whatever, maybe it's not as defined and, here in the US, like the DSM-5 or whatever version they're on now, but there are these sort of traits that you start to recognize. And I think you just like, you explore them really, really well here and just sort of the frustration that folks with these traits get when things just don't go their way. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
do we need to go to questions?
we have a couple questions. Yeah, we can go to questions. Um,
I just want to wrap that up. I think, the talking about the story, the story, the thriller or the horror, as a fantasy. It is a fantasy about defeating such a how the weakest person ends up defeating the strongest person. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, that's all stories, right? Like even yeah, I always say, night watching is sort of a every woman put in sort of a action movie scenario. But I've kind of realized that even action movies are about the little guy defeating the big guy at the end of the day. Like, he may be Bruce Willis, but he's up against 50 guys, right? you know. So I think it's just sort of a universal kind of thing in storytelling that we all want to hear.
I was thinking,
Um,
I read that line about mums, how a mother's pain tolerance goes sky high. That
right.
reminded me of heroin a lot. Her pain tolerance off the charts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like those videos on social media where they have sort of labor simulators that they put on men and women, and the women are just fine with it, and the men are just making a giant fuss. It sounds pretty right. I have a few questions. All right. So, what are you working on now?
Ashley, is Ashley still here? I'm so thrilled that Ashley, who is a brilliant novelist,
Yeah,
I'm
her blurb is right here from on your
well,
book.
got incredible taste. I'm so thrilled that she is here, even though I can't see her. Um, oh, I love all of these questions. I'll answer the easiest one first. What are you reading currently? I just read Annie Bot by Sierra Greer, a book. Have you read it?
Yeah, she and I, it was sort of the battle of the Sierras in the Fallon Book Club. It was the first book I was up against. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to lose because I started reading it and I just absolutely loved it. And by some miracle, I got past her. And that was the first time I thought I could win this because if I beat this book, it was so incredible. I mean, I just loved it. I loved it.
So Annie Bot is about it's told from the point of view of a female robot who is a partner and a sex robot, but she becomes a metaphor for every woman, and her journey. She sort of emancipates herself from the need to serve men. Um, should we do, what are you working on now? I'm working on a new thriller, with feminist bent. And um, I don't think I want to say more than that right now. I'd like to know what Ashley is working on. What is your favorite part of writing, drafting or revising? Mm, I like, when I wrote Clever Little Thing, I had the best writing experience of my life. And I feel like the rest of my life is going to be trying to get back to that because I hadn't written for such a long time because of the pandemic. And I homeschooled my children. I ended up homeschooling my children for 18 months. So I was so thrilled to settle down and write at last. And this story had been simmering away. So it came out like, fully formed. So that was the best, but it's not usually like that, really, is it? So I like revising a lot as well.
Yeah. Um, and also, so do you think, you'll edge further into horror? It's one of the questions as you continue writing.
No, I think I'm more interested in thrillers. I think, and even this Clever Little Thing, it's very light horror. There's no actual, like, it's all psychological horror. There's no violence. I'm very scared of gore. And I know you've got a bit of gore in yours, Tracy, but like I'm very squeamish about gore. And but I do want, what I like is a book that's really, really scary, that keeps you on the edge of your seat and that you can't put down. I definitely want to write another book like that if I can.
Yeah, I think that so much of scary stories isn't really even goriness and even isn't even really the supernatural. It's all in, like you said, how you just wanted suspense, right? Like that's what you were after. I think that that's so often the scariest for people because your imagination takes hold, right? Like that it kind of takes over and you start thinking, what would I do if something was happening with my child and no one believed me and it was this very bizarre thing? Like, how would I react? Like that sort of putting yourself in the character's shoes and the suspense there can often be more scary than kind of goriness or violence or anything.
I mean, you can do a lot with the subtle menace of everyday situations, like your kid is acting weird today, or what's that noise coming from upstairs? Um, uh, you don't need to have buckets of gore to write a really scary book, except maybe at the end.
Yeah, well, I think it is sort of interesting though, because I think maybe I don't know if it's true for you, but for me, becoming a parent, I have such a hard time with violence of any kind in a way I never did before. I find myself worrying for the random people on the street in the action movie during the car chase type of thing. Like I just have such a hard time with it now.
I bet your new book's got loads of violence in it. I mean, don't give anything away. I know I but I mean, it must have quite a lot of violence. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it too is definitely more suspense than anything else, but it's a lot more of sort of a outdoor survival thriller. So there are definitely just life-threatening situations and fear. But I think that more than that, you because the main character is a child, I think you as the reader understand more than he does as you're reading, and I think that's where a lot of the fear comes
Right.
from,
Yeah.
in the same way that like you have readers kind of fearing for Stella and what is going to happen to her, I think that that is just a really kind of core fear that so many people have, this kind of worry over children and their understanding or their lack of understanding or how much they understand and what they're going to be able to do and be capable of and survive.
Why aren't you? Here's a question, and don't ask me the question because I don't know if I have an answer to it. But my question for you is why aren't you could write feel-good novels. So why is it that you want to write a really scary novel? Is it, the examination of it makes you feel better to get the monster out of the closet and look at it? Or why don't you
Yeah, yeah, I think it's, a way to like excise
love
the
feel-good novels?
anxiety.
Right? Because you're
Yeah.
Yes, I think you mentioned that. Oh, you mentioned that you thanked your anxiety in the acknowledgements, didn't
Oh
you?
yeah, I did. I did. I called I thanked it. It's good for something, I guess. Oh, another excellent question. So you have she says is a brilliant author and also teacher, which you have an incredibly impressive CV, by the way. My goodness. What is your number one piece of writing advice?
Oh, that's a really good question. Number one, I actually have a really good answer to that. My number one piece of writing advice is have fun telling a story. And what I mean by that is when you write, you're you have don't bore yourself, entertain yourself. Like you are writing to amuse or move or upset yourself. The idea of have fun telling a story is um I mean it means a lot of different things to me. And one of the things it means is forget about what everyone else thinks, forget about whether your editor is going to like this, forget about whether it's going to be marketable. Just have fun telling a story because when you're writing, it's just you and it's just you. So focus on entertaining yourself. And I feel like the emotions that you feel when you're writing it, if you're excited and having fun, the reader will have fun. But if you're just kind of like, oh, I'm bored, or why do I have to do this? The reader will feel that too. So that's it. Have fun telling a story.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great advice. Um, Are you finding that it's harder to do that for book two? Because I did.
And also, book two must be similar to book one so that the readers carry over from book one, but also it can't be too much like book one because otherwise people will say you just wrote book one again. I did have, I did have a problem with that for a while, and I think I was trying to write clever little thing. But then just recently, actually, so I have been sort of struggling for a while with these different characters, but then just recently, it all clicked into place, and I was like, oh, and so I just threw everything away, and I'm starting again. But now I'm super excited, and I'm like, this is it. I'm having
Oh,
fun, and I
that's
so
such
I
a great moment. Such a great moment when that happens.
And if you're having fun, then you don't really care that much if your editor likes it or if you're, I mean, obviously, Pam, I hope to God you like it, Pam, our editor. But it you're writing it to have fun. And so at the end, you can let go of the end result. I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's definitely a moment that you kind of it all comes together. And I think if you're reading something and as the author, you're kind of actively entertained, even though it's hard to explain how many times you end up reading your own book, if you're still kind of entertained and moving forward, I think it's just kind of this magical moment that happens for sure. It's really, yeah, it's good advice if you're enjoying it.
Do you think you always know if you've written something good, and if you've written something that's not good, you did know it kind of deep down? Like, can you trust your own judgment about what you've written? Like when you've got it, like say when you wrote Night Watching, where you're like, I'm nailing it, I'm nailing it, I'm writing an incredible thriller, or were you just like, I just don't know. Maybe other people will think this is gripping, or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll think I'm crazy.
I think it's like you said, the best you can do is make sure you're enjoying it. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like you can never know what other people think and in a way you like can't presume to, right? And so the best you can do is enjoy it yourself and be writing in a way that is entertaining for yourself or that is making you think or bringing out things that you want to bring out. Because really, like, who can do more than that, right? And I think that to kind of yeah, I think that is the moment when you're actually able to kind of create things that other people might identify with because it's a little kind of more true.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
With that said, when I was writing Clever Little Thing, I did have this great writer moment of thinking this is brilliant. And but only lasted for like one day. And then I was like, oh no, maybe it's not, it's terrible, whatever. But that one day where I was like, this is brilliant, that was like, the best drug. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it, but I did have that feeling for that one day.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and it's not just writers, I think it's anyone who's an artist. If you're kind of an honest one, there's a certain amount of insecurity, right? I think it's just part of it. But I think in a way you kind of can feed off it and try to, you know, kind of get better and better because of that and try to make things as good as you can for yourself. And hopefully, fingers crossed as you send it off to other folks to read it.
Well, I can't wait to read your new book, Tracy. I'm just I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes next from you too. Even though it's always so much pressure when people say that, I think, but it
I mean,
is it
God,
is
I'm
exciting just to
think
see
that.
where people go.
Hmm.
So with that, we are approaching the 1 hour mark, so I'll pop in and start to wrap things up. Folks, let's give Helena and Tracy a big virtual round of applause for a wonderful conversation. As you can see, Tracy is holding a copy
One,
of
two.
Helena's latest book. Clever little thing. They both got them. Excellent. Helena and Tracy, where can folks learn more about you and your works?
So for me, helenaechlin.com, or just go and find me on Instagram.
Great. And Tracy?
Yeah, I'm on, TikTok as long as it lasts here in the US. I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Instagram, Tracy Sierra author. Do not hunt me down on X. I am not there any longer.
Right. Excellent. Neither is the Tewksbury Library, a matter of fact.
Mhm.
So, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it. Folks, for those watching live, please take the Zoom feedback survey. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, and look for the follow-up email with the recording in about 45 minutes. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. And please go purchase a copy of Helena's book. Want to thank Wellesley Books for being our official bookstore partner, and there'll be a link in the follow-up email to order a copy. So thank you all, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Robert.
you.
Thank you, everybody.